Nowhere Man, Please Listen. The song written by John Lennon in 1965 could apply now to leaders in presidential palaces, big White Houses and chanceries almost all over the world. And they are proliferating. In the presidential house in Lagos, in Nigeria, in the White House, in Washington, in the Elysee, in Paris, and well, I don't know where our nowhere man lives. I do know that we're so dysfunctional now that Just Stop Oil protesters were able to sit on the roof of the Prime Minister's house for 5 hours before the cops managed to apprehend him. He didn't care. He was at his billion dollar mansion in California. Where else would a British Prime Minister be amidst the hardly global warming of my cold, wet, miserable homeland right now? But we'll be scouring Africa, Pakistan, where another nowhere man has just jailed the leader of the Pakistani people, ImranKhan. We'll be talking about Russia and Ukraine, and we can't get far from Niger, our new jewel of Africa. So fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night. It is, after all, the mother of all talk shows.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway. The mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway. The world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
He's a real nowhere man, sitting in his nowhere land, making all his nowhere plans for nobody. I heard it today, and I got to thinking, which of the world leaders does it most apply to? And then it became obvious that actually the answer is almost all of them. How prescient, as always, from the great John Lennon 50 years ago. The reality is that nowhere men are not listening. Nowhere men are talking and doing, and the rest of us are more or less passively accepting, except in some very exceptional circumstances, to which we shall turn. There's the nowhere man in Paris, who thought that he could threaten the new leadership in faraway Niger, from which France generates 80% of its energy, its power, whilst only 20% of the people of Niger have any electricity at all. France, which has no gold mines, but is the 4th largest holder of gold reserves in the world, where Mali has 585 gold mines and doesn't hold any gold at all. He thought that Mali, he thought that Niger, he thought that Burkina Faso, he thought even the stooges in Nigeria and Chad would follow his orders, that by this day, this afternoon, the new leaders in Niger must vacate the presidential house and reinstate the French puppet. None of it has happened. The Nigerian president, a geriatric former gang godfather in Chicago, I'm not making that up. How else do you become president of Nigeria? Not by having done anything for or in Nigeria, but being connected, shall we say, to the drug business in the Windy City in the north of the United States. He thought he's another nowhere man. He thought he could crack the whip and the Nigerian Senate would agree to his demand to invade their neighbor, against whom they have already cut off electricity, water, and other essential services. But the Senate said, no, we have enough problems in Nigeria without Africans killing Africans for the edification of the French leadership. and the leadership of the United States of America. So there will be no Nigerian invasion of Niger. They kind of half thought that Chad would do the invading for them, but they too have refused, meaning that Nigeria and Chad are out of the game, whilst Burkina Faso and Niger are increasingly marching in lockstep alongside Mali. And of course, the great colossus of Algeria to the north, with its military political alliance with Russia going back to the day of independence, has made it very clear and has today moved its tanks to the border with Niger that any foreign invasion of Niger will have to fight Algeria for every inch of the territory they hope to seize. And of course, anybody who fights Algeria is also fighting Russia. And the Wagner group, the mercenary Russian group, already present in substantial numbers, working for different African governments, trying to staunch the flow of Islamist extremist fanaticism in Africa, have already arrived in Niamey, the capital city of Niger. It's a token force so far to secure the capital, if needs be, from any foreign invasion. But if you see a lot of Russian transport planes arriving in Niger over the next hours and days, don't be surprised. Thus, France has, like the United States in Ukraine, bitten off more than it could chew and may choke as a result. France has just demonstrated it's not so much a paper tiger as a paper poodle, a paper French poodle, and they don't get fancier or more poodle-like than that. The United States has clearly done the same in the Ukraine. They have given $140 billion from the taxpayers of a country who don't all even have minimal health care, who are suffering from a city, a country that's falling apart at the seams. Even Kamala Harris was talking about flat tires, though you may need some translation to work out what she was saying. But she was right. Driving around in the United States on the roads and bridges that exist there is a very dangerous pastime indeed, even if you manage to avoid the 2 mass shootings a day in the United States of America in 2023. $140 billion that could have been spent on the American people has instead been given to a now politically, militarily, and morally bankrupt, state-led stump state of Western Ukraine, led by a former porn actor, strip artist, and general comedian. Zelensky has taken the American taxpayers for one hell of an expensive ride, as have all the US satraps that rule our European countries. History will find it hard to explain to students 100 years from now how it was that European leader after leader agreed to a set of self-destructive policies that would destroy their own country in the name of destroying another and failing, all at the behest of an American president, a nowhere man who doesn't even know which nowhere land he's busy making plans in. It will be impossible to explain to people how Russia has just taken Germany's place as the 5th largest economy in the world. Do you remember when all these clowns used to disparage the Russian economy, not even bigger than Italy, they used to say dismissively? Do you remember all these clowns that told you about 550 days ago that the Russian ruble would be rubble, that the Russian economy would be crushed. Like Schultz said, Germany will suffer no recession. And now Germany is in recession. The Bank of England is so desperate to avoid declaring recession, it has just again piled on the agony with another rise in Britain's interest rate, making mortgage paying for tens of millions of people all but impossible. With, of course, the winter colds not even 12 weeks away. The winter cold, when it sets in, will have to be defended by the use of your heating, the bills for which tripled and quadrupled last year, all for the edification of energy companies like British Gas, who quadrupled their profit in the same 12 months. Although they're coming to take away your heating in the name of net zero. Forget that boiler that you're burning. That's so last century. It's going to be a heat pump, don't you know? A heat pump which won't work, will cost £25,000, will make zero difference to the infinitesimal contribution Britain makes to carbon emissions in the world. But you'll be cold, and you'll be hungry, and you won't be happy, but you'll have done your bit for the greenery and the quackery that is the prevailing orthodoxy in the sinking Western polities and economies. The Russian economy is booming. The Chinese economy is booming. The BRICS conference in South Africa will mark a significant turning point in the history of the world, where the BRICS countries will begin to dwarf the GDP of the so-called G7 countries, which only a few years ago thought, at least, that they ruled the world. They don't think it now. 7 nowhere men sitting in their nowhere land, making all their nowhere plans for nobody, and still they are not listening. But to be fair, that's because we are not speaking loudly enough. And we're not acting decisively enough. We're not prepared to sink our differences and come together, those of us who can see at least certain things clearly and in concert. And so they win in elections in which fewer than half of the people vote, and fewer than half of the people vote for the candidate who wins. And so we have a prime minister in California, while the louts are clambering around the prime minister's roof, draping black cloth over it. God knows what that's supposed to mean. And they're up there for 5 hours before the cops can shanghai them. But he is basking in the California sunshine, whilst telling you that you have got to be cold and you have got to be poor to make a contribution to a global warming which this summer has seen Britain's worst summer in 55 years, seen July, the wettest July in the entire history of the British Isles, at least as far as that history is recorded. These nowhere men are taking you to nowhere, and you are going like sheep to the slaughter and are doing nothing about it. We on the mother of all talk shows, and you as our audience, we're doing our bit. 1.25 million people watched last week's show. So far, these numbers grow and grow over many weeks, even months. But 1.25 million, whilst knocking Piers Morgan into a cocked hat, is making scarcely a dent on the powerful who continue to mislead us all the way to nowhere. Let me turn, if I may, to the situation in Pakistan. It's been some weeks since we dealt with it. Some kind of hiatus appeared to be in place. The foolhardiness of killing, either literally or metaphorically, the most popular political leader in the country because the United States of America didn't like him, seemed as if it might lead to some kind of compromise, free elections, and everyone agreeing to accept the result. But no, yesterday, dramatically, ImranKhan was seized and taken to prison, sentenced to 5 years in prison on corruption cases from a government that was all in exile, mainly in London, for high crimes of corruption running into billions of pounds. A trumped up rubbish charge of corruption has put the Prime Minister in prison in Pakistan. Even worse, he's banned from political office for 5 years. They hope that they have decapitated his party. Maybe they have, maybe they haven't. Time will tell. But the goons that jailed ImranKhan will never sleep soundly or safely in their beds, because ImranKhan managed to rally many millions of people, particularly young people, and not just in Pakistan, but amongst Pakistanis abroad, who will never forgive this real-time crucifixion of the leader that they revere. I say they. I repeat what I've said 100 times. He's not my leader. I'm not his party man. I've been involved in Pakistani politics for 50 years nearly. I'm the holder of the 2 highest civil awards in Pakistan. I know what I'm talking about in Pakistani politics. And I've seen all of this before. My late and great and dear friend Benazir Bhutto was repeatedly overthrown, imprisoned. Her father was hanged. Her brothers were murdered. She was murdered. I watched on television my friend Benazir Bhutto being murdered on TV while I was on the air broadcasting at Talk Sport. So for me, this is déjà vu. It is like a record baby spinning round and round. I've been here now so many times before. And Pakistan will now descend into a vortex of violence and alienation. Who will believe elections without ImranKhan, inarguably the most popular political figure in the country? Who will believe them? Who will accept that the next government in Pakistan is in any way legitimate, even if it is cleaned of the worst thieves? And that's a big even if, because behind the scenes, at the very least, they will continue to pull the strings and pick the pockets of the people of Pakistan. An endless merry-go-round of elections, rigged, of people coming to power, being overthrown by the army, and then the new lot criminalize the old lot, and the old lot get back in and criminalize the group that criminalized them. The Pakistani people deserve so much more and better than that. We'll be talking to Major Adil Raja, retired, about Pakistan. We'll be talking to Professor Marandi about Iran, which, according to the Sunday Times, this day is now Britain's biggest threat. Wait, what? Wasn't it Russia? Last week, wasn't it China the week before that. Now it's Iran. That is our biggest threat, according to the Sunday Times, never knowingly failing in its duty to be the mouthpiece and the foghorn for the deep state, intelligence, political and military deep state in Britain. And we'll be talking to the father of Gonzalo Lira, a long-time guest on this show, whose videos purporting to be from the border between Ukraine and Hungary have attracted tens of millions of views in just a few days. It seems like the name of Gonzalo Lira is traveling, and that in itself is a problem for Joe Biden and for President Zelensky. We'll be talking about all these things and more, because this is the mother of all talk shows. As the green smoke rose, their faces flashed out pallid green and faded again as it vanished. Then slowly the hissing passed into a humming, into a long, loud, droning noise. Suddenly, a humped shape rose out of the pit, and the ghost of a beam of light seemed to flicker out after it. Forthwith, flashes of actual flame, a bright glare leaping from one to another, sprang from the scattered group of men. It was as if some invisible jet impinged upon them and flashed into white flame. It was as if each man were suddenly and momentarily turned to fire. Apparently it was Greenpeace on the roof of the Prime Minister, a distinction without a difference. They were on it for hours before the police managed to break out of their rainbow epaulets and get their hands on them. But we are talking about the Just Stop Oil demand, which is part of this green quackery to which we have been railroaded without debate, without a single vote being cast for net zero 50. So there is a poll. Just Stop Oil, yes or no? What do you say? Just Stop Oil, yes or no? You can vote on my Twitter or my Xer or whatever we call it now, on my Telegram, t.me/George Galloway, on YouTube, on the stream, or on the community poll. 12,826 people have voted so far, and the great majority of them oppose stopping oil. Phone numbers, if you want to comment on anything said or not said that should have been on the show, if you're in the UK or Ireland, it's free of charge. It's 0808 196 5522. That's 0808 196 5522. If you're in the US or Canada, equally toll free, it's +1 844 944 3344. That's +1 844 944 3344. And if you're in the rest of the world, which is overwhelmingly the rest of you in humanity, it is 44203 966 2625. 44203 966 2625. Now, to explain this latest dramatic turn of events in Islamabad, we turn to our old friend Major Adil Raja. The lion roars, and he roars often on the mother of all talk shows. Major Raja, thank you for joining us again. This came out of the blue for me. Did it come out of the blue for the Prime Minister, ImranKhan?
No, obviously not, George, because he was expecting it. He was very much expecting it. That is why he had recorded a video message earlier before his arrest, which was released after his arrest to the wide world. Now, from the outset, George, let it be very clear that Imran Khan was facing 150 cases. And the sole purpose of all these cases were to disqualify him from fighting the upcoming elections, because the military junta is so scared of him that of his popularity, that they just don't want him to fight the elections, because they know he's going to win, and if he'll win, he's going to carry out accountability across the board, which will take the crooks right now in power down. So definitely he knew it was very much expected. Yeah, George.
Now, this is a page out of the Joe Biden, Donald Trump playbook. They're terrified that Trump will defeat them, so they'll do anything using lawfare, hundreds of charges, indictments, and so on. So far, they haven't put Trump in prison, and in the US, you can even be elected president from prison. What will happen to Imran now that he is behind bars?
Well, you see, George, there is no comparison between US, a free country, and Pakistan, a colony of the West, US-led West, and now China as well. You know what happened? The false flag operation of 9th May, that was his first arrest. There was a false flag, huge false flag operation conducted by the military intelligence and by what we call the Gullu Butts. There's the political workers of the ruling party who instigated the mobs, created a violent situation, and then they went on a crackdown against PTI. They jailed 20,000 workers of PTI in Pakistan. They broke the houses. They took away mothers, daughters, and even wives of political workers. Even army officers and their wives were picked up who were siding with Imran Khan. An example was created. There was a crackdown in media. Everybody was forced shut in Pakistan, and then they went out on a transnational repression operation throughout the world. And surprisingly and astonishingly enough, I fell a personal victim of it here in the UK. You know very well that I fled my country. I fled the wrath of the fascist government over there, whom I was serving. In fact, I came here to the UK thinking that there would be freedom of speech here, and I would be able to, raise voice for democracy over here. But in fact, I fell victim to the transnational repression, which is part of the global operation by the Pakistani fascist state. But surprisingly, only the British authorities collaborated with the Pakistani authorities in this regard, whereas the US authorities, they did not involve themselves in this transnational repression, or even the Canadian authorities did not involve themselves in the transnational repression. But over there, they are carrying out an operation called Operation Margala. This is operation conducted by the ISI undercover officers. They are ringing up the Pakistani diaspora and people, and they're trying to harass them into silence. They are carrying out facial recognition through the Pakistani databases, and then they make calls to them. They are, canceling their Pakistani nationalities. They're going after the families. They find the family trees from the Pakistani data. Then they go after the families, and there is an international global transnational repression going on, operation going on, so that now Imran Khan has been arrested. They wanted everybody to stay shut, and they've been successful, in fact, in keeping the Pakistani media shut. BBC is very selectively picking up people who are anti-Imran Khan for interview. The latest hard talk with the Stephen Saka was in fact such. I was amazed. I was ashamed of the show. It was as if Stephen Saka has got all his questions from Islamabad, from the Rawalpindi, from GHQ. That all the Alexis in Islamabad, it seemed, had given his question to Stephen Saka, and he was advising Imran Khan to leave politics. So this collaboration between the British authorities and the wider Western world, I mean, it's not surprising, George, because the Pakistani regime right now under Asim Hitler Munir, he's willing to sell the country. He's willing to sell the country's minerals. He has given a contract to the Chinese for 15 years to keep on extracting the copper ore from Balochistan, which is unaccounted for pennies. They must have given something to the British as well. I mean, Pakistani ports are for sale, Pakistani airports are for sale, Pakistani minerals are for sale for pennies. And in all this quagmire, ImranKhan just doesn't fit in, because ImranKhan talks about the national interests of Pakistan, whereas the people ruling Pakistan right now, their personal interest becomes the national interest and becomes the so-called strategic compulsion. So it's a one-window operation dealing with the army chief Asim Hitler Munir and getting things done, you know. So at the end of the day, it is about resources, and Pakistani resources and Pakistani sovereignty is on sale. ImranKhan just does not fit into these plans, George.
Where is he now, Major? How safe is he? I read this evening that his lawyers have been unable to make contact with him. This is unconscionable. This is the Prime Minister. This is the leader of the biggest party in a country of 250 million people. How do we know that they will not literally kill him behind bars?
You see, right now there is a gross international pressure as well. I mean, people are happy. The Arabs are happy that Pakistan is for sale for the cheap rate and they're going in, but they know at the same time that the manpower in the Gulf countries, for example, and the diaspora in the West as well, is Pakistani diaspora is a sizable diaspora, and this diaspora overwhelmingly support ImranKhan. So there is a pressure on the Pakistani state to, you know, keep him to keep him safe and to keep him alive. Having said that, ImranKhan has been sentenced 3 years in prison and 5 years disqualification from contesting for a public office has been ordered against him by a junior court, by a judge who is himself compromised, by a judge who has been making Facebook posts against ImranKhan, derogatory Facebook posts with pictures against ImranKhan, and the judge has acknowledged that, and the judge is right now in the UK, in Hull University. He's attending a 5-day course, you know. We are writing to the Chancellor, Vice Chancellor of the Hull University to have a look into what kind of people he's hosting on behalf of Commonwealth. So this guy, he's got no moral ground, no moral standing, but this is the judiciary for you in Pakistan right now. And ImranKhan is right now in Attock jail. Attock is in Punjab, and the jail has been converted into a military strong point. The military resources have been used to strengthen the Attock jail. People have gone there. His lawyers went there to meet him to get his power of attorney signed, but they were told that they were refused a meeting. They were said to come back tomorrow and they'll get the document signed. Army is in charge of keeping ImranKhan captive. He's being captive in a civilian prison, but overall command and control, have no doubt in it, is with the army chief, with the army, and with the inter-services intelligence, that's ISI. Not only of ImranKhan, but all the people, his key political workers, particularly the ladies who have been kept in solitary confinement. All the management and all the command infrastructure has been directly taken over by this Gestapo and Stasi-styled ISI, which is carrying out, you know, a purge in Pakistan, a successful purge, I would say, because the kind of reaction, people are scared to come out, people are scared to talk in Pakistan. And even globally, I've told you, there is transnational suppression going on, transnational repression going on by the Pakistani state. So this is the situation right now, George.
Now, a very good friend of mine, now deceased, very close with Benazir Bhutto, indeed with her father, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, was kept in C class, which was pretty primitive. Not in Attock, but elsewhere. Is this the old Attock fort? And what class of prisoner will ImranKhan be? In other words, how bad will his situation
legally
be in this jail.
George, legally he should be an A class, right? But there are rumors coming out of the prison that he has been kept in the C class. He was arrested from Lahore. He was honorably arrested and escorted up to Islamabad, but he wasn't kept there in Rawalpindi, Islamabad, but moved to Attock. Now it's got a symbolic relevance. Why he's been kept in Attock is because Nawaz Sharif has been kept in Attock. So Nawaz Sharif wanted a revenge, whereas it was not ImranKhan who got Nawaz Sharif arrested. It was President Musharraf who got Nawaz Sharif arrested, and he was kept in the Attock fort with the Special Services group of commandos, where he used to cry, and he used to cry so much with tears that the commanding officer, I was there, I was an eyewitness, the commanding officer, he got scared that he might die of heart attack or something. So they gave him special kind of food, but he will still cry. So what he did was he got Nawaz Sharif out, and they gave him a whistle, and they made him a referee in a volleyball match, so that he would come out and he would participate, and that's what actually made him happy. So that's what saved him life as well. And then he started eating and started, asking for special kind of dishes from his chef, which was provided to him. Imagine that. But nothing like that is provided to ImranKhan. ImranKhan is being kept in the highest maximum security prison. He is being kept in the C class as far as we know. And it is at the behest of Asim Hitler Munir, I say him, Asim Munir, who is practically acting as a servant of Nawaz Sharif, who has illegally appointed him as the army chief. And he is serving the global interest of not only the Western world, but also the Chinese are happy with him. He's keeping the Iranians happy as well, and he's keeping, he's selling Pakistani resources, he's compromising on the Pakistani sovereignty. There is talk going on in the town that the next surgical strike before Indian election of Modi would be conducted in Kashmir, and the Pakistanis are being asked to stay quiet in response so that Modi can get re-elected. That's why I say that he's dealing in the sovereignty of Pakistan as well. Now, ImranKhan, simply does not fit in any of this equation. This blatant sale of the Pakistani assets, Pakistani sovereignty, and what we call in our language, George, is Pakistani ghairat. Ghairat is an Urdu word. I failed to find a translation in English for this word, but it does. The closest match could be dignity.
Dignity, indeed. We'll stay across this developing story, Major Raja, with your help, God willing. Thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows, Major Adil Raja, on the 3 years imprisonment of Prime Minister ImranKhan, and perhaps more importantly, the 5-year political disqualification. So, just stop oil, ? Yes or no? Well, on Telegram, 15% support stopping oil. On Twitter, it's 22%. On the YouTube community poll, it's 14%. On the other hand, we've got 85%, 78%, 86% that say no to just stop oil. If you've got a point of view on that, make sure your vote is recorded by the end of the show. A quick break from me, then it's your calls right up to the hour. Get dialing. On the line is a Rose in Texas. How's that at the beginning of a song? On Californication, which is a song. Rose, welcome to the show.
Fan of the show, transgender fan of the show, and I wanted to briefly address your monologue from last week on Californication, because I almost entirely agree with what you said. Trans women athletes taking medals and records, directing children at nightclubs, and even going to elementary schools themselves, not to mention hormone blockers for children as well. The attack on freedom of speech, not only against conservatives, but anyone who doesn't fall in line with the agenda, rainbow flags on NATO military aircraft, which is certainly doing more to cultivate anti-queer sentiment around the world than there already is. All of that makes me sick. So because I don't believe in incest, bestiality, necrophilia, and pedophilia, I'm basically culturally right-wing by today's standards, even though less than 5 years ago, I'd still be left-wing. So in regards to you and everyone else watching who thinks of me and people like me as the villains right now, you should know that I support the most traditional Muslim, Jewish, Abrahamic believers to be as homophobic and transphobic as they want, because guess what? That's freedom of religion, which is a value we claim to have in the West. Now, my religion, I suppose, is I believe I'm a woman, but guess what? Not everyone has to convert to my religion. Otherwise, we basically have a theocracy, only this theocracy is for the ever-evolving LGBTQIA supercalifragilisticexpialidocious club. So that's all I wanted to get out of my system. Thank you.
Well, Rose, if I could put your call in a glass bottle and ship it around the world, I promise you that I would do so. Crystal clear, beautifully expressed, and I wish you every happiness in life. It is exactly what people who are transgender should be saying. And if they were, they would disappoint the liberal zealots who want to use them as a battering ram against the traditional family values of the rest of us. Beautifully expressed, Rose. I'll never forget it.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Let's go straight to the lines because, frankly, the switchboard is melting. We've got Trevor in Cambridge on Africa, Russia, and Pakistan. You'll be lucky to get them all in, Trev. There's a big pressure on calls tonight. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, George. I don't know a great deal about the Pakistan scenario, but I'm very familiar with the Russia and the Africa scenario. It's funny that we were talking just. We were talking just a few weeks back regards Sudan and the interference from the West and their various ways to destabilise the area. And now we're looking at, Eastern Sudan. And now we're looking at the West, where you've got Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, and Nigeria potentially involved in a Western-backed problem that's arose again, because it seems to me, George, that there's nowhere safe in the world from these people. What they're going to do is they're going to move from one failing venture right onto the next one. And you've seen it documented marvellously that Iraq, Libya, Yemen, etc. And now we've got this Ukraine complete and utter debacle failure. They're going to destabilise and upset the constitutional existence of Russia, and it turns out now that Russia's completely and utterly a brick wall in front of NATO with their best expenditure and their best efforts to try and destabilise it via the media. And then what you've got is hundreds of thousands of dead and maimed Ukrainian men, women and children, of course. But this is a disaster. So what they've done is they've completely and utterly failed in Ukraine. It's called China. China's too big.
Well, look, Trevor, it's not a great line, Trevor, but it's a great call. As long as they keep failing, then they'll keep losing, and eventually the last straw will be laden on the camel's back, the camel being us, the public, and the countries led by these fools, and that back will break. And we don't know what the last straw will be. Maybe it's already been loaded. The reality is that after 140 billion US dollars and scores of euros and pounds from the NATO satrap states, the Ukrainian armed forces are defunct. 400,000 are dead. Millions have fled the country and are driving top-of-the-range motors in Marbella and Monaco and elsewhere. If you don't believe me, just watch, just look. The millions who've left are never coming back. The poorer Ukrainians who've left are never coming back because life is better on a council estate in Cambridgeshire in England than it is in Western Ukraine. and certainly the Western Ukraine that is going to be in the future, a kind of stump state, a kind of new Kosovo. Why would you leave Cambridgeshire? Why wouldn't you stay in the place to which you have fled? Of the remaining numbers of remotely serviceable men, and they're drawing that definition very widely indeed, as you know. Even disabled, even mentally disabled people have been drafted. People are being seized on the streets when they thought they were in protected areas of the economy and dragged off to the mincing machine, which is all this so-called counteroffensive has turned out to be. Now, all the heavyweight media in Western countries is already daily acknowledging that. Hasn't filtered down to the news bulletins or to the tabloid red tops, yellow press that is read by the masses. They're still being told that Ukraine is winning. But in all the heavyweight newspapers in all the Western countries, it is now openly being discussed that despite all this money, despite all this Ukrainian blood, much more importantly, Ukraine has lost the war. So there's an old military adage, never reinforce failure. There's something that all of us know, military or not. Don't throw good money after bad. It's time for everyone to demand of their own political representatives and their own governments and their own media. Stop throwing good money after bad. Stop reinforcing failure. Stop pretending you can have peace talks about Ukraine without Russia being present. I'm not making that up. That's what they're about to do in Saudi Arabia. Have peace talks about Ukraine with Russia excluded. They're going to do the same in India. Have peace talks without Russia. Well, of course, without Russia, there can be no peace. And Russia's war aims, having been steadily satisfied, are of course increasing. That's what happens in any war. The more you fight such a war as we see in Ukraine now, the more the losing side will lose, the more the winning side will demand. And I have laid out here many times what I am sure the Russian war aims now are. And you can listen to back pages in order to hear what they are. Adam in Bedfordshire asks, anyone seen that awful BBC Hard Talk interview with his pro-fascist army narrative going against ImranKhan? Indeed, Adam. Stephen Sucker. I gave him a couple of doings once on television. He never invited me back. Come on, Stephen, come and have a go if you think you're hard enough. No, you're not. Marco Mata says France's gold reserves are mostly stored abroad. Other central banks have likely lent it or sold it, but since it was certainly all stolen from Africa, I'm certainly not sad about it. Let's go to Loch Lomond, where the very erudite Ian wants to talk about Pakistan. Ian, go ahead, sir.
Good evening, George. The sun is shining here in Loch Lomond.
Well, of course, it shines on the righteous, Ian.
So they say. Now, I find it passing strange, George, and I think you might too, that they used lawfare to take down a popular leader in Pakistan, in ImranKhan, and to jail him. And there's a strange, and of course, that's going to lead to civil unrest, possibly even civil war. And Pakistan's a nuclear-powered country. And there's a strange reflection in North America, where a popular ex-president, love him or loathe him, is being pursued by lawfare and is now facing criminal charges which could see him in prison for an awful long time. And also, just to remind you, 3 weeks ago I told you to watch the Suwalki Gap, and I repeat that tonight, the Polish, Lithuanians, and Latvians have all moved forces to block Kaliningrad and Belarus. That's where the flashpoint might happen. Over to you, sir.
So many flashpoints, so little time. Of course, the Suwalki Gap we talked about last week on the show, and you were the first to raise it several weeks before that. This is Kaliningrad, which is a piece of Russia separated by a part of Ukraine and a part of the Baltic republics. The clever clogs in NATO have waxed and waned between the common sense of blockading Kaliningrad or not. Of course, the Russians can still access it by air and by sea, and will do so in any event, but they're not likely to allow the land bridge to Kaliningrad to be severed or to be in the hands of such men and women as run these yapping Baltic states. So it is one of many flashpoints. Niger is another. The Persian Gulf, another. We'll be talking with Professor Marandi very shortly about that. That's Iran, Britain's biggest threat, just so you know, up there in Loch Lomond. We used to say, look out for men in fur hats with boots, a bottle of vodka sticking out their pocket, and snow on those boots. Then we were on the lookout for Chinese, inscrutable Chinese, studying at our universities. Now, in Loch Lomond, you better keep an eye open for a mullah in a long beard and flowing robes, because turns out it's Iran that is the biggest threat to the good people of Loch Lomond. You could take the high road or you could take the low road. Ian and I prefer the high road always. Ian, thanks for that call. Vijaya Suryamurti says, Le pauvre, poor, petit Macron. Bad enough he's being spanked by Brigitte. Well, I have no idea what he does behind closed doors with his aging spouse. That's entirely a matter for him. He could spank Justin Trudeau or the other way around, for all I care. I'm a party sort of guy. I'm happy when people are happy. But just don't frighten the horses. Keep it away from the kids, and don't try and force it on other people. David is in Swindon on the Sunak protest. Go ahead, David.
The Sunak protest, right. I was saying to your researcher, it seems very strange that this billionaire guy can't afford two guys at £200 each to guard his property. Don't you? That seems a bit mean.
It is, but he is the British Prime Minister. Are we now so emaciated a country that the Metropolitan Police's finest, or whichever constabulary it is, cannot have a couple of cops on the Prime Minister's house?
Exactly, but the reason the police chief gave was they're only obliged to protect his first and second residences. Absolutely ridiculous. Because it's his third residence, which he's got that swimming pool in, they're not obliged to do that. That's what the Yorkshire police have said. And just to irritate, I looked at this. There's a video of the people actually approaching his property with ladders at 6 a.m. in the morning. You can actually look online. There's a YouTube video. There's a YouTube video. And I looked at this 6 a.m. and the Yorkshire police did not get there till 8 a.m. You couldn't make it up, as you say.
And they didn't put hands on them for a further 3 hours after that.
But the other thing is, well, going back to security, my granddaughter, when she's away on holiday, whether it be in California or whatever, she's got one of these ring bells. Anybody approaches her property, she gets a message on her phone. I've been with her when they get it. I don't know if you know them, these ring bells.
Yeah.
Somebody approaches the property.
I mean, he's the Prime Minister. It's not his duty to guard his own property as long as he's the Prime Minister, because, God forbid, these people could have planted a bomb in the British Prime Minister's property. They could have put poison in the eaves of the roof. They could have smeared the doorknob with Novichok. They could have done anything. So the fact that he wasn't there, or that it's his third property, is immaterial. If we are still Great Britain, if we are still a proper state, you know, if we're accepting that we are nothing now, that we are on such a slide that we can't even protect our own Prime Minister and his property, then God help thee and me, David. God help us. All right, Dave, thanks for the call. Email from Tony. Our email address is onair@moats.tv. Hi, George. We're seeing Russian flags flying across Africa. The French have lost their uranium supplies overnight. NATO and the EU are flapping big time. Tony, as we say in Glasgow, so sad, too bad, never mind. Now, in the next hour, we've got both Gonzalo Lira Sr. at 8:20, but next we've got Professor Seyed Mohammad Marandi right after the break. But we'll take one call before that break. It's Rob in Southend-on-Sea on Pakistan. Go ahead, Rob.
Oh, hello, mate. It's lovely to call you again. I was finding out really more about ImranKhan, but your last call was so fantastic. What you did with that was so brilliant. That just made me laugh so much. But ImranKhan, people should know that he's most probably one of the greatest cricketers that has ever graced the pitch. He's an amazing guy, a seriously good all-rounder, up there with people like Richard Hadley, Ian Botham. He's just like awesome. And when I say the word awesome, I don't mean it like an American hot dog. I mean like a mountain. Really awesome. Good-looking dude. He had the world at his feet, and I cannot believe, for the life of me, why the hell he's in prison. I don't understand the politics of this stuff. I'm just some lowly pleb in Southend. But it just breaks my heart that this man is now in jail. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say about ImranKhan.
Yeah. Yeah, go on.
So
You still there, Rob?
No, I miss your big callers as well. I love the Elvis impersonator guy and that lovely lady at the end that goes, "Hello, George." I love all of that.
Yes.
Your show is superb.
Excellent. Well,
I'm a huge fan,
thank
mate.
you. What we try to do is be a global university of the airwaves, but to create characters that will occur and reoccur throughout the show. And Norma in Bristol is one of those. Ken in Acton is another. We try to have some light and shade, not to pretend that everything in life is black and white, that there are nuances and gradations, variations on stories. Thus, Major Raja had a go at China twice, at Iran once, in his defense of ImranKhan. I didn't jump down his throat, though I reject both of those points, because we think there's a place in media for allowing people to speak freely, for allowing people to speak their truths, and everyone else can judge them. And of course, in time, we'll have different points of view, different nuances that will help to balance the worldview of our alumni, the millions who watch the mother of all talk shows. Rob, a very beautiful call. I appreciate it very much indeed. From Southend-on-Sea, Just Stop Oil, 13,858 people have voted, and it ain't looking good for the Just Stop Oil crowd. They're at risk of making Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives more popular rather than the perdition to which that government deserves to be headed. Right after the break, Professor Seyed Mohammad Marandi of the University of Tehran. Stay tuned. Let me say that you can listen to the audio-only version of MOATS on our MOATS podcast, and the numbers on that are going through the roof. Just search MOATS with George Galloway on Apple, Spotify, Google, or whichever platform you listen to your podcasts on. In recent weeks, it's been the #1 political podcast in Benin, Jordan, the Gambia, Qatar, Jamaica, Ghana, Iceland, Malaysia, Singapore, Sweden, and the Philippines. #1 political podcast in all those countries. Truly, truly phenomenal. Do you know that BBC News has lost 40% of its audience in the last 2 years? It's official. And of course, that is the sensible thing to do. But to get people to tune in and change course and listen to a radically different point of view is even more difficult. But it's happening. And the numbers that we are racking up are now in their millions.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
There is nobody better at providing a view of not just the Middle East, not just the Islamic world, but increasingly international politics itself than Professor Seyed Mohammad Marandi, who joins us now from the University of Tehran. Professor Mohammad, thank you as always for joining us. It's difficult to know where to start, and it will be difficult to know where to end because events are moving so very fast. But they're not going well for what we might loosely call the West. They're not going well for the West in Africa, where the effort to declare havoc and unleash the dogs of war on Niger, first called for by President Macron, appear for the moment to have failed. How do you see the situation there?
I think as the situation deteriorates for the West, and this has been going on for a very long time, the United States was really at the top of the world after the Second World War. And since then, there has been a general decline in the sense that the economy of the United States relative to the global economy gradually grew smaller percentage-wise. And after the collapse of the Soviet Union, I think at least for a decade, people thought that the tide had turned and the United States would be the only superpower or hyperpower, and that we'd reached the end of history. As we all recall back then, people speaking about the fact that liberal capitalism was the final phase of human evolution. But after 2000, after a decade, we saw the perpetual wars. We also saw the economic crisis in the United States and in Europe. And after that, the decline of the United States, I think, increased the rate of decline very rapidly. And the wars served as a catalyst. And so now the United States and the West, as it is called, they no longer have the ability to control the world as they did in the past. And we are seeing Latin America slip away from the United States. We're seeing Africa slipping away from the United States. And the case of Niger is, I think, extra important because of the role that it plays in providing France with uranium and energy, and providing Europe with energy at a time when the West has sanctioned so many different countries, and it has limited sources both for oil, gas, but also uranium. So the more the United States and the West try to control the world, the more the world is slipping away, or they are losing control over different parts of the world. And we are reaching a very interesting phase, because I think we've actually reached the end of an empire, but at the same time, it is probably the most dangerous phase, because empires do not want to lose power.
But you're a professor. If you had a student that persistently turned in work that you had already shown to be wrong repeatedly, you as a professor would be very unhappy. And yet, imperialism has turned out to be a very poor student too. Just rapidly thinking, while you mentioned the Second World War there, the United States has not won a war since 1945, and it wasn't the United States that won the war in 1945. If you go, this is now the anniversary of the Korean War, 70 years from the end of the Korean War. If you look at the Korean War, Vietnam, Afghanistan most recently, now in the Ukraine, they keep using the same tools, even though those tools are increasingly shown to be defunct. The tools being sanction everybody, make war, and invade where we have to. But these things are backfiring, as you say.
Yes, I think one professor once said that this would be madness when a student would constantly, or they would constantly repeat something that just simply does not work. And you're absolutely correct. The United States was at the top of the world because they had the largest economy, but also because they controlled the narrative. Otherwise, we know that in the Second World War, the Soviet Union played a far more important role in defeating Nazi Germany. And we know that the atrocities committed against China by the U.S. ally today, Japan, was greater than the atrocities that were committed against civilians in the heart of Europe, Russia aside. But we don't ever hear acknowledgement of that. We don't hear acknowledgement of the role that the Soviet Union played. We don't hear how the Chinese suffered. Millions of Chinese were murdered, and of course Koreans as well, by the Japanese, who are now U.S. allies. So, but even I believe that the U.S. is also losing control of the narrative, because in the past we learned about the world through the West, even in Iran, which is a revolutionary country, anti-imperialist. But most of our news would traditionally come from Reuters or CNN or the New York Times, and it would be translated into Persian. And so we learned about China, we learned about Latin America, we learned about Africa, largely through Western eyes. And from my travelings to different countries, conferences, I saw that the same was true when it came to Iran. In Russia, in China, in our region, in Latin America, people knew about Iran largely through Western eyes, through Western media, through Western narratives. But that is changing, because now we are seeing how local economies, as they've grown, alongside them, local media has grown. And right now you see a thriving, when I went to Venezuela and Cuba, I saw that they had their own media that had influence across Latin America. I'm not saying that the playing field is now level, but what I'm saying is that the balance of power has been tilting away from the West, especially since 2001, at a very rapid pace. And as things continue, as we move forward, I think that this is going to continue, and I think it's going to become even more rapid, because I personally believe that there's going to be a point where you have a collective understanding that the West is no longer in charge. And when that happens, I think there will be a lot of changes taking place simultaneously across the board, even though as we speak, the changes that we're now speaking are extraordinary. And we see right before our eyes how the West is losing control. But I think in the not so distant future, it's going to become even more become even more interesting.
Now, I haven't read the story. I only saw it on my screen literally as the show was beginning, and I don't, of course, buy the Sunday Times or pay their paywall. But it turns out that it's not Russia or China that is Britain's biggest threat. It's Iran. Do tell us what fiendish plans are in store for us.
I think the problem that the UK and the United States have with Iran is that they never forgave Iran for gaining independence after the revolution in 1979, but also because of the fact that they support the apartheid regime, the Israeli regime. In other words, Western calculations in our part of the world are based on Israeli interests, not on British interests, not on American interests. And the fact that the Israeli regime is facing so many problems, both within the Zionist supremacist community inside Israel, but also they're losing support across the West. We see polls indicating that people are beginning to better understand, and many young Jews are growing hostile to the apartheid regime as awareness grows. And in our region, we see how the Israeli regime is weakening. It no longer controls its borders. It no longer controls the West Bank. It doesn't control Gaza. It's having a great difficulty subjugating the Palestinian indigenous population, and it no longer is able to impose its will outside of its borders. So as the Israeli regime becomes more concerned and more fearful of all the challenges that it faces as an apartheid regime, I think that causes more concern for its backers in the West. Otherwise, what problem does Iran pose for the British or the Americans? The Iranians are protecting their borders. The Iranians are expanding trade and business with neighbors. We've had rapprochement with Saudi Arabia. Relations with other countries in the Persian Gulf are improving. You would think that under these circumstances, if Britain and the United States were normal countries, they would welcome this and they would see this as an opportunity to invest in Iran, to cooperate with Iran. But that's simply not going to happen. And I think it's because the interests of the British people, the interests of American citizens are not the priority here.
No, they prefer the zero-sum game approach. If Iran is doing well, that means ipso facto we are doing less well. And this idea of coexisting, my two suns theory, when I say the sun is clearly rising in the east, but it didn't have to set in the west. If we had embarked on a course of acceptance and cooperation, a multipolar world, then we wouldn't be in the mess we're in. But we are in a pretty big mess here in the West. Anyone who looks at the streets of Philadelphia, the walking dead that are hooked on drugs, looks at the 2 mass shootings a day now taking place in the United States, looks at the perilous economic position throughout the European allies of the US, knows that things are not going well. No one's thinking this is a glad, confident morning in the West, Professor.
Yeah, and George, we always let's keep this in mind. I mean, your viewers, yourself, myself, that the United States is not facing any sanctions. And these scenes that we see in the United States, you can't see them in China. You don't see them in Shanghai or Beijing. You don't see them in Moscow. You don't see them in Tehran. I've never seen such scenes anywhere in Iran. I'm sure Iran, despite all the sanctions, despite the brutal and barbaric sanctions that are intended to bring ordinary Iranians to their knees, despite all this, I mean, there are many difficulties and shortcomings in Iran. But you don't see these scenes despite all the difficulties. But in the United States, which is supposedly, as American leaders like to say, the greatest country in the world, these scenes, when we see them, it's extraordinary. How could such a country, which claims to be the land of the free and the home of the brave and an exceptional country and the greatest country on the planet, how could it allow its citizens to live in under such horrific conditions, yet at the same time it wants to have the Ukrainian young men die in the hundreds of thousands for a lost cause, and Ukrainian women to increasingly be a part of the sex trade across Europe and North America? When we look at this, the Americans seem to me, and to many like me, as really the most immoral country on this planet, and to be very blunt, the most incompetent, because when a country which after the Second World War had so much wealth and power, the scenes today, after less than a century, are just unbelievable. These are scenes that we don't, as I said, we don't see in the countries that are sanctioned, but we see in the country that is trying to create misery and despair across the world.
Professor Marandi, as always, a great pleasure and indeed an education to listen to you. Thanks very much for joining us. Just Stop Oil, yes or no? You can vote on Telegram, on X, on YouTube community, and on the YouTube stream. 14,118 of you have voted, and it is pretty overwhelming against the demand to just stop oil, except on the YouTube stream, where in a giant leap it is now 28% in favor of just stop oil. Me, I want to exploit every last drop of Britain's oil resources, every last droplet of our gas resources. I want to see a real balanced energy policy, and I'm fighting for a referendum in Britain on the net zero 50 proposal. Now, coming up right after this break is the father of Gonzalo Lira. You won't want to miss this. Stay tuned.
You have to remember back in 2002, 2003, there was a wish by George Bush for regime change. That's what was driving him. Nothing to do with weapons of mass destruction, which of course didn't exist in Iraq. So they had to construct some sort of formula, some sort of cover story in order to persuade the British public that intervention in Iraq was right. Now, David Kelly, as an expert in weapons of mass destruction, knew that this was untrue. He knew that there were probably no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq.
That was a guy that could have brought down, the whole system.
I reckon you're chaff. You're being thrown up to divert our probing.
The Foreign Affairs Select Committee, that parliamentarian briefing, I think that was an indignity to him.
We saw it on the news, and my very first thought was shock. Oh my God, you know, this man is in the eye of the media hurricane. He should be protected by that at least.
You've got blood on your hands, Prime Minister. Are you going to resign over this?
I don't know the details of how Lord Hutton happened to be selected, but what was certainly the case is that he was the right kind of judge to use from the point of view of Downing Street and the intelligence services as well.
Of the 21 days of hearing, only one half of one day was spent on discussing the forensic aspects. That is disgusting.
We were given the Hutton report the day before it was published, but actually what happened was he went too far.
The events of 2003 were disgraceful ones in this country's history, and it's unfinished business. Those responsible for an illegal war, those responsible for the death of David Kelly, have not been brought to justice. There's been no inquest into David Kelly's death. There needs to be one. We need to make sure that those who behaved in a reprehensible way in 2003 are finally brought to book.
I'm very proud of my film, Killing Kelly. If you are one of my Patreon supporters, for the cost of less than 1 cup of tea in an insalubrious cafe per week, you've already seen it for free. But you can get it on Amazon, you can get it from my shop, or the fastest way would be to become a supporter of mine on Patreon, patreon.com/George Galloway. Now, Gonzalo Lira, a Chilean-American, living in Kharkov in the Ukraine, was a regular, appeared regularly here on the Mother of All Talk Shows, and was actually, by a short head from Scott Ritter, the biggest watched interviewee that we ever had on the Mother of All Talk Shows. He racked up literally millions of views just on our show, and of course he used to appear on many, many more. And he had his own platforms, also his own YouTube channel. He hosted shows, one of which I was once on, I recall. So he became quite a significant counterculture figure. I always used to say, and I say it again now, I hold no candle for Gonzalo Lira's political views, insofar as I know them. Many of those that I know, far from holding a candle to them, I find them actually repugnant. But I don't require to agree with someone before listening to them. In fact, quite the contrary. It is more important and valuable to listen to somebody that you disagree with than the politics of preaching to the choir and allowing only the choir to preach back at you. So I was content, more than content, to give a platform to Gonzalo Lira many, many, many times. And all I can say, and it is literally all I can say, the strategic damage that he did to the NATO camp, the Zelensky regime, the war machine, was so great that all other matters pale into insignificance, including the issue of who he really is, what he really thinks. I recall very well what happened after the triumph of the October Revolution in Russia in 1917, when it was discovered that the secretary of Lenin himself had been a secret agent for the Tsar. Everyone was in an emotional outrage. But Lenin calmly pointed out that this secret agent of the Tsar had done great work for Lenin, had to, in order to continue being his secretary. And what are you worried about, said Lenin. We triumphed, after all, didn't we? So none of us know what's in other people's hearts, what's in their heads, what their true motives are. All we can measure is what they did. And Gonzalo Lira did severely damage the narrative of the war party, the narrative of NATO, the narrative of the Western political class and media class. And I'm very grateful that he did. He did so at very considerable risk. He may have paid for that. Not just with his liberty this time, but with his life. Now, who he really is, what he was really doing, why he uploaded a video on the border with Hungary, why he didn't try and get across the border without leaving a video message behind. This is all scuttlebutt to me. I'm only interested in the big picture. And instead of using the re-incarceration of a figure known now to many millions, more than most of his critics, exponentially more than most of his critics, instead of using this opportunity of an American citizen scurrying for his life from the Kiev thugs as a further stick to beat our leaders, NATO, Zelensky with, what do I find? I find a whole subculture, semi-industry of people who think it's more important whether or not Gonzalo Lira is entirely what he presents himself to be. Who cares? I don't. I don't care if other critics of the war party are later revealed not to have been who they said they were. That's not important. What's important is the material damage to the war narrative that they did while they appeared, at least, to be on our side. Now, I had very much hoped that Gonzalo would make it over the Hungarian border, but maybe he didn't even go to the Hungarian border. Maybe it was another border. Maybe there are things that we have no knowledge about at all. It is very important, as I told you a couple of weeks ago, never to place absolute reliance on the words of someone in prison. Because someone who's in the hands of the enemy can be exploited, can be misrepresented, can be falsified, can be encouraged or discouraged from doing this or that at the click of a finger. You've only got to threaten to torture somebody in your jail, in your custody. You've only got to threaten to torture them to make them do or not do this or that. So never, ever believe absolutely what someone who is not a free man or woman is saying to you across social media. Just keep some sense of perspective. Just keep some material consciousness. Who is gaining from the words being spoken by this man, and who is losing? But we couldn't bring Gonzalo with us because we don't know where he is. There's no sign that he made it into Hungary, if Hungary he did intend to make. There is no word except from a transsexual American man, now woman, who hates Gonzalo and is now, bizarrely, the spokeswoman, stroke man, it, them, whatever, of the Ukrainian military. There she is. He is. Announcing that Gonzalo is again their prisoner. Is she telling the truth? How can we tell? One thing we know is Gonzalo's not here, but his father is. Gonzalo Lira Sr. watched those videos that his son put out, read those tweets that his son posted, hoped that he, like us, would be having a reunion with Gonzalo this evening, but sadly not so. And so I introduce to you for the second time on the show, Gonzalo Lira Sr., father of Gonzalo Lira, the journalist and campaigner. Mr. Lira, sir, thank you for joining us. It must have been a roller coaster, a difficult few days for you.
Yes, indeed, George. I thank you, first of all, for having me once again in your show. It's been terrible. As a father, it's unbearable not to know where your son is. Now, I know that obviously during his period in prison from May the 1st to July the 6th, Gonzalo was tortured and extortion. The worst things in the world are in those prisons of countries like Ukraine, where the value of humankind is zero, and no one in the world does anything to prevent countries like Ukraine to violate human rights to any individual that may fall into their hands. If I may give you a statement, Gonzalo, I'm sure, has been detained once again by the Ukrainian police while he was trying to leave the country in search of asylum in Hungary. I have texted his attorney, Viktor Sezkovny, and he has no information. Gonzalo was certain that in his August 2nd court appearance, he was to be found guilty and sent to prison for 8 years. Why wasn't he deported and get it over with? By the way, since Gonzalo did not appear on August 2nd, the court gave him another date, August 22nd. Hard to believe. Gonzalo, after suffering torture and extortion in the CISO prison, was finally released by posting a bail bond and attempted to leave Ukraine. My son posted 3 videos because it was his last chance to tell the world that in Ukraine, torture, extortion, and the worst treatment of a human being is normal practice. Spokesperson Miller and the Department of State of the USA are a collection of morally wrong bureaucrats at the mercy and serving a decrepit president being investigated at this point in time. The State Department has not honored his pledge that says in every U.S. embassy that they are bound to help U.S. citizens in trouble overseas. Do you know why my son George did not ask the USA for asylum? Because he simply knew the U.S. Embassy in Kiev would have sent him right back to the criminal SBU. Biden is under investigation for receiving money from, among other countries, Ukraine. Biden is behind this war of attrition. The end will be the destruction of Ukraine as we knew before February 2022. Open your eyes. We're seeing the end of the USA as an empire and the birth of a new one, China. Biden precipitated the decay of the USA as world leader. The US government presently is spending 53% in military and 47% for other goods. The USA as an empire has ended and has died as the biggest producer of armaments in the world. To sell, it must create wars. The prosecutor, in his charges, admits that Gonzalo has not done any criminal activities towards individuals or property. All Gonzalo has done is criticize Zelensky's war strategy and the lies that Occident is reporting as to the outcome of the war. My son was tortured and suffered extortion, forced to pay $70,000 to jail thugs, or we destroy your left eye. He got cracked rib in his first cell. The worst stretch was in his fourth cell. And I'm quoting one of his videos when he says, once inside Sizewell prison, my son was tortured in 2 of the 4 cells he was in. And he was tortured by his fellow prisoners. Guards never beat prisoners. They outsource torture and extortions. From 1 p.m. June 21st till 7 p.m. the next day, 30 hours, he was beaten and sleep deprived. His arms twisted the wrong way around at his shoulders, and generally beaten pretty bad. What is the USA doing to protect a U.S. citizen born in Burbank, California, on February 29th, 1969? Is the State Department looking the other way, as spokesman Miller did? My son was released on a bail of $11,000 and handed him both his passports, the USA and Chilean. Days later, he picked up from the SBU offices his driver's license, his BMW motorcycle papers, and they did not put an electronic brace on his ankle. I strongly, George, suspect that this was a setup by the sinister SBU so that they can add another legal accusation. Finally, I'm requesting Antonio Guterres, Secretary of the United Nations. I'm requesting Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, United Nations Watch to pressure Biden and Zelensky to free my son of an assured death in an Ukrainian jail. Finally, I'm requesting Tucker Carlson, Max Blumenthal, George Galloway, Tim Iverson, Alex Christoforou, Alexander Rubinstein, and so many others like you, George, men of heart, men that defend the right of individuals to have my son be free once and for all, deport him. That is my statement, George.
Free Gonzalo Lira, that is the call from you and from us in the mother of all talk shows. Once he's free, all manner of things can be discussed and revealed. But until he is freed from the dungeons of Britain and America's best friend, the Kiev regime, then there can only be one order of battle. One order of battle only, that everyone should follow. We demand the release of Gonzalo Lira. Whether we like him, don't like him. Whether we think he's this or that, we demand his release. I think that many could, certainly should, rally behind that call. Gonzalo Lira Sr., thank you. In a very painful interview with me, you have done some good for your son and for humanity.
Let me just show you.
Let me
this,
move on.
Let me just show you. This was Gonzalo when he was a senior in high school. at his home in Santiago at that time. After high school, he went on to Dartmouth College in the USA, graduated with his bachelor's degree, and his diploma was handed by the then President Bill Clinton. My son does not deserve to be in jail, George.
No, you should try and get Bill Clinton to do something also. That's a very everyone has to put their shoulder to this wheel. Whatever they think of his views, everyone should be involved in this campaign. I need to press on because we need to allow callers to respond, Mr. Lira Sr. And so I thank you and I beg your leave. Just Stop Oil. You can still vote on the poll. You can call the show 08081965522 in the UK and Ireland. In US and Canada, +1 844 944 3344. In the rest of the world, 44203 966 2625. A quick break, your calls right to the end of the show. Do you know how many people watch MSNBC? If this was a normal business, it would be out of business long ago. Do you know how many people watch CNN? We are in danger of fixating too much on the liberal hegemony of media outlets with infinitesimally small viewership. This show that you are watching has 10 times the viewership. 10 times the viewership of Rupert Murdoch's Talk TV with its budget of billions. So, you know, let's not lose hope. Let's be our own media. You're right, not everybody watches me, watches those other people that you watch. Well, it's your job and it's everybody else's job that's watching this and agrees with me this evening. It's your job to tell as many other people as you possibly can what we are all about, how to find us, encourage them, and check up afterwards whether they took your advice, and if they didn't, encourage them all over again. Have you any idea how we would multiply if everybody watching this did that? The best part of 2 million people will watch this program over the next 7 days. If those nearly 2 million spoke to one other person, we'd be 3 million if their advice was taken. And so on and exponentially on, it is possible to go. It's in our hands, let's do it. I can't do much more than what I'm doing. I need you, the audience, to spread the word.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
So many people trying to get on the air. Let's go straight to Detroit. AJ is in Detroit and wants to talk about the Black Sea and Russia. Go ahead, AJ.
Hey, George. I've always been a fan of yours. It's my first time calling in. I just, I wanted to touch on Ukraine, but I just wanted to, I've always wanted to tell you, whenever I'm depressed or looking for a feel-good video, I always go to the 2005 Senate meeting that you had with that rat Norm Coleman and how you wiped the floor with them. I really recommend that all your viewers watch that. That was really funny. But, you know, I'm just like shocked how NATO, of all people, have the gall after destroying Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, Somalia, Yemen. How can they condemn Russia on a limited border war when they went halfway across the world to bomb countries? I mean, where were the tears for the people killed in the Middle East? You know, and I honestly, I believe that Russia truly has kept the gloves on. I mean, they went in with a very small force of, I don't know, 50, 80,000. To take Ukraine, you'd need it in the millions. I mean, it was 1.1 million when Germany took Poland. But anyhow, Russia, I don't think Russia's taken the gloves off. I don't think they've used weapon systems. They're saving them for NATO if they're dumb enough to enter the war. But what Ukraine is resorting to, these terrorist attacks, I feel like it's a act of desperation to shift everything that's going wrong in the front lines in the Zaporozhye area, shift it away from their failures, the failed counter-offensive. And I just wanted your take on, do you actually believe that the West would push another country for peace?
Well, I'll tell you what, if that's your first call, I hope it's not long until your second call, because that was an outstanding analysis of the situation. I demur on only one point, which is that you should be shocked by the cynicism of our rulers. I'm not at all shocked. I've lived a longer life than you and have lived through many such shocking examples of immoral, cynical, lying, twisted, and extremely violent behavior. They are not going to do what they do and tell the truth about it. They invaded and conquered Africa to Christianize it with the Bible in one hand and a carbine in the other. We're only holding the hands of the poor Africans long enough for them to be able to run their own affairs. All these fake narratives were what the naked theft of other people's resources, lands, in the case of Africa, even people, were clothed. It was about democracy and freedom in the post-war period. But the garb may have changed, but the ugliness of the body therein never changed. As George Orwell said in his first novel, Burmese Days, when a young girl asked him, "What is this imperialism of which you speak?" And the George Orwell character, civil servant in Burma, said, "Imperialism is going to other people's countries and stealing their things." And you know, many great tomes have been written on imperialism, but that one line in Burmese Days could suffice, you know. It's about going to other people's countries and stealing their things. In the past, you openly stole them. You smashed them, occupied them, and literally carried off their things, or even as slaves, their people. Now, you put a puppet tyrant in power, and he subjugates and suppresses his own people in exchange for some of the goods that are overwhelmingly shipped back to you. So the people of Niger, to give one example, like all of French Africa, Francophone Africa, their currency is the French franc. They are required to keep 50% of their foreign currency reserves in the bank in France. They have themselves no gold, no uranium, very little electricity, very little economic development in Niger. But their product has made possible the wealth of the people of France, the country, the state of France, and many other places. So That's what imperialism is, going to other people's countries, stealing their things, putting lipstick on it if you can, and calling the other fellows exactly what you are yourself. The Alexander the Great story I told on Wednesday. How dare you terrorize these waters as a thief? And the thief answers, how dare you terrorize the whole world and call yourself an emperor? Thanks for that call. Here's an email. What's the chances of seeing Victoria Nuland handing out cookies to the protesters in Niger? Great show as always. Regards, Enrique. Thank you, Enrique. I think she'd be lynched. That would be a peculiar historical irony. My Patreons are my life's blood, so I give priority to those, and one of them is a legend. It's Graham Briggs-White, who says we could have been transitioning quite some time ago with thorium salt reactors, solid-state wind farms, geothermal energy, and the use of carbon capture, but thorium salt reactors cannot be weaponized. How strange. How strange indeed, Graham. Thank you for everything. Paul MacDonald says, would you get on a modern jet that depended on batteries, George? You can, but certainly not me. Great show as always. Please become a legend. Support me on patreon.com/George Galloway. John's on the line in Ormskirk on France. How's this for a global university? Go ahead, John.
Hi, George. Just wanted to say, first of all, I am full of gratitude for the work that you do. I don't know where you get your courage from to stand in front of all these countries and speak your truth. But I want you to know that there's people back here at home and all over the world that really appreciate the work that you do. In particular, George, I was very concerned about the World Economic Forum and the WHO and the influence that they have on all political parties all through the world. But in particular, France was making a stand. And we haven't really heard from France because they had a social media blackout. And I was wondering whether what you've heard, because I'd like to know what success they as a people are having over there, because we seem to be somewhat behind. But I've got this feeling slowly and inevitably the pressure that people are feeling in different parts of the country will inevitably come to the UK. And I'd just like to know whether you have people and you're hearing things that are actually happening on the ground in France.
Well, I'm actually in France, so I don't want to reveal exactly where, but I can tell you that the French people are boiling mad. They are boiling with anger at their political leaders. Fewer and fewer of them are blinded by the sand that's thrown in their eyes in the mainstream media, and they're turning off mainstream media just as quickly as our people are. More and more people can see more clearly the nature of their state, and therefore inevitably, eventually, some time lag, of course, the role that their country has played in Africa and in the world as part of the imperialist system. Most of the most atrocious crimes of empire in Africa were carried out by France, with Belgium, a tiny little runt next door, a close second. But the British, of course, had the biggest empire. The Portuguese, the Spanish, all had empires in Africa. The French people cannot see this yet clearly, although at least 10 million of the French people are the children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren of that empire. But what they know is that France isn't working, certainly not working for them. The 1% in France is very much a 1%. The middle class in France is boiling with rage, and the working class is, of course, the most downtrodden of all. And below them, the lumpen proletarian mass in the banlieue, in the suburbs, in the slums of France, of places like Paris, Marseille, and others. So I have more hope for the French, John, than I do for our own people. I feel that the French have a certain esprit de corps that our people are going to have to discover. And if they don't, we're going to sink under the waves. You know, Britannia ruled the waves. Now Britannia is slipping under the waves. I'm very sorry to say that, but I feel it most keenly. YouTube comments, Goonie 1972 says, Norma in Bristol sounds way too nice for Bristol. It was a pirate haven once. I've got a soft spot for pirates myself. The one and only Norma in Bristol is on the line from the former pirate haven of Bristol. Go ahead, Norma.
No, I do deviate, George, I know. But we're a bit down at the moment because we don't go out and we're not well. But I listened to Tony Bennett. Now, I don't know if you know, he died last week, aged 96. Do you know Tony Bennett, the singer?
Do I know him? I'm going to tell you a story when you're finished about me and Tony Bennett. Go ahead.
Oh, right. No, he was 85 years old. He gave the most magnificent concert. And he was so suave and sophisticated. I sang When You're Smiling and I Leave My Heart in San Francisco. All the oldies, and the audience loved it. And a very little use of the microphone. And I thought it was quite a tonic, and it gave us a feel-good factor. So I thought I'd tell you about it.
Well, Tony Bennett was one of the great crooners, a very, very fine singer, and a very fine man. A man who supported the equal rights of all the citizens of the US when it counted and when it was painful to do it. Painful to your career, even painful to your person. Tony Bennett was a very fine man indeed, and a great, great singer. And my late father, God rest his soul, I Left My Heart in San Francisco, was a song that he used to sing. Now, in 1990, right after the downfall of the Ceausescus and the Romanian Revolution, a good friend of mine, Big Bob Wiley, formerly of the BBC and other journalistic outfits, a comrade of mine for many decades, he and I went to Romania, to Bucharest. The father and mother, Elena and Nicolae Ceausescu, had not long been executed, just days before, and all the children of the Ceausescus were under various forms of imprisonment. And Bob and I wanted to get access to the main son, the leading son, Nicu Ceausescu, who was being groomed as the successor to Nicolae Ceausescu, and we had to go and plead our case in front of a lawyer, Paula Jacob, who allowed us to visit her at home, and we clinched the deal for access to Nicu Ceausescu, the son of the fallen dictator of Romania, by our rendition of I Left My Heart in San Francisco. I'm not joking. That's exactly what we did. And it got us inside the jail and got us the interview, and the result is published in a book very hard to get now, published by MacDonald Futura, called Downfall, the Ceausescus and the Romanian Revolution. Hat tip to my good friend Bob Wiley. Reevesy says, I would love to go to a pub with Norma. What a great night that would be. There you are, Norma. I think everyone should call in on Norma. She can't get out to the pub at the moment, but you can always leave her a wee baby sham. Leave her a wee baby sham or a bottle of stout, Norma. Thank you very much for that call. 15,261 people voted, and overwhelmingly they voted against the foolish nostrum of just saying no to oil. I don't have time for final thoughts. I've expressed myself as best I can, I hope. And so it remains for me to invite you to join me again on Wednesday at the slightly later time of 9 p.m. UK. 9 p.m. UK time on Wednesday, I'll be back for the midweek mother of all talk shows. Until then, I bid you only this, to please bring another viewer with you on Wednesday. The show suffered because of the holiday period. Last week we leapt up to 1.258 million. We've got to get back right up to 2 million, or I'm not doing my job. Good night.